How's it
Hey,
going?
not bad. And today, instead of focusing on mall crimes, we'll be focusing on psilocybin and shrooms. Now, with you being on stress leave, I guess I just have to ask, have you been self-medicating to deal with the stress, or has that been?
Yeah, that's a totally fair question. And the answer is an enthusiastic yes.
All right.
So I'm someone who also is on antidepressants, which is like completely the move for me, has been like really, really helpful for me. I just started taking them like earlier this year, actually. Um, but with psilocybin having this place in kind of a gray market right now, and with their access as a result of that being um, a lot more direct than they have ever been previously for me anyway. Yeah, I've definitely been self-medicating a little bit, and it's been amazing. It's been hugely beneficial.
Okay. Yeah, like for me, I'm undiagnosed now. Like I was diagnosed with um, depression in my early 20s, but now I'm almost 50, and I what I was being medicated with in my early 20s wasn't working for me. Um, and I probably should bring that conversation back up with medical professionals, but I haven't. I've just found my own way through life, and then but recently I've been using shrooms as well, and it is one thing where the lasting effect it's been totally positive for me, and yeah, it just I come out of it, and I mean the trip itself is one thing. It's separate from that lasting effect that psilocybin can have. So yeah, we'll get into the zine and what you were bringing up in that. Um, and actually, there's one line you you bring up because it's a very good point, but I always kind of laugh because I almost see for myself that it's the opposite. But you talk about people with terminal illnesses um, using psilocybin to help face um, the anxieties about dying. But
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of other people, like with mental illness or that sort of thing, it's helping them face the anxieties of living. That and uh, that would be what I find in it, and I find it fascinating that it kind of does. It's two sides of the same coin because it for people who with terminal illnesses, it's still an anxiety that's they might have a more definite reason for why they're terrified all the time, or um, but it's still two sides of the same coin with that, and it's just an interesting point to me that um, and I don't know where the question was. That was okay. So
Yeah.
um, we'll I guess we'll probably just be shooting the shit about mushrooms for this. um, but yeah. So do you want to just start off and talk about? You're not a professional on this. You're not an expert, but talk about you and your um, introduction to psilocybin mushrooms, and what inspired you to write the zine?
Amazing. So, my name's Jill Clair, she, they, and I have a background in library science, which I only bring up because if you go through library school, it equips you with some pretty good research skills. And while my day job doesn't often present me a lot of opportunities to do a lot of research, I have found an outlet with zine making to get some like moderate level research done. And so in the past, I've done stuff on repealing the sex ed curriculum in Ontario, on safe injection sites, on the 1492 land back lane movement. And my most recent research zine project was investigating psilocybin because I couldn't figure out why it wasn't legal. So I, dedicated like a few hours into like feeling the history in Canada and where it's at in terms of legalization. And I feel the real impetus for this was there is a dispensary in London, Ontario. It's one of the Fun Guys dispensaries, which are all over the country right now, which is amazing. And just sort of like, as we were talking about at the hop, just having this like almost immediate access to psilocybin has been amazing. It's been really helpful for me. I think like looking back, the first time I ever tried magic mushrooms, I was 22, 23, I want to say, and I was at a festival with some friends, and a friend had some, and it was in this like it was like this really positive experience festival in this field in the country of like Eastern Ontario. And it was this like really positive experience. And so I've always kind of hung on to that, um, sort of like fast forwarding a bit and having like a formal diagnosis of depression and general anxiety disorder, and speaking with a lot of pals who have similar like mental health situations. It like the consensus is overwhelmingly this is so helpful for me. Microdosing is good for my anxiety, it's good for my social anxiety, it helps with my depression. There was a friend I was speaking to about this several months ago over the summer, who talked a lot about how not exclusively using magic mushrooms, but just the use of hallucinogenics in general can be really conducive to ego death, which he explained to me was kind of not like almost being able to remove your bias from every situation, which I thought was so interesting. So that's sort of something I've been keeping kind of in my back pocket as I've been self-medicating. Um, and that, yeah, I think that lays the groundwork pretty well. That's the deal.
Okay. You've done quite a bit of research here, and um, you you mentioned how it was legal here until 1974, and the war on drugs um, in the US, the Food and Drugs Act here. Now, we'll see where I end up with this, because I've been talking to a lot of people involved in harm reduction, and this ends up tied into that. But it seems like when we make progress on these things, there's always a backlash. And like right now out in BC, there's huge backlash happening on the work that groups have been doing to push like safe supply, and the work that's being done on decriminalization out there is being pushed back. So the when it comes to the work that is being done for decriminalization of mushrooms, and you even go into, there's an example you cite throughout this about the case where a man in Saskatoon, I believe it was, is he was allowed to attend. It wasn't self-medicating, was it? He was
Yeah,
in.
he was the first person in Canada to be approved for therapeutic use of
Yeah.
psilocybin.
Okay. So yeah, and then how, like, I mean, pretty much partway through that, he was stopped, and it was never approved for him to go back to it. And he was using it for the end of life anxiety so that he could maintain his mental health and still continue to help his family. And I think it's gonna get worse, because it's looking like we might get conservatives in. I can't really tell for the rest of the country, because I live in like a conservative uh wasteland here, so I always know that it's going to be conservatives next time.
They're so lucky to have you, Colin.
I hope so.
They are.
But yeah, I'm just thinking about how, or what people can be doing. I know we'll talk about the writing of your MP later, because you do that really well in here. But separate from that, when there's this, we get some progress, it gets pushed back. What do you think at a grassroots DIY level? How can we stay positive about things when there's always that backlash or pushback? Or
Such a good question. And like, certainly, like, as a depressed person, staying positive, something that does not come natural to me. But I will say that I think talking about it is, I think, on a day-to-day level, one of the most useful things you can do, like specifically engaging people in discussion, and then embracing your community. I think this is something, like, especially post lockdown, folks are maybe a little out of practice with, is like leaning on your support network. Also, something that I think a lot of people, the idea of accepting help or needing help makes them very uncomfortable. But I think you, I truly think the best way to remain positive, remain loving, but also full of rage, is to participate in your community and open your heart up to people, and just be prepared to, you know, have conversations that might take you to an uncomfortable place, you know, my my strategy when navigating those conversations that can be uncomfortable is, you know, just do your research, right? Spend a few hours, um, read all about it, like a resource I have returned to again and again. The Health Canada website has a whole write-up on magic mushrooms and psilocybin, including all of the ways that you can access it legally. And I'm sure we'll get into that because it is very fraught, but you know, that's a pretty like reputable resource for information. Because psilocybin is still technically illegal for recreational use. Um, there are some legal scholars you can find and who have like written their think pieces on why they think it's so silly that psilocybin um, was ever made illegal in the first place, because there are species of magic mushroom that are indigenous to Canada, like it's just growing in Durham, right? Um, and yeah, I was listening to this Michael, um, I'm gonna get his last name wrong. I think it's Kovac interview a few months ago, and he talked about how the best way to stay committed to a cause is love and rage. When people give way to despair and cynicism, that's when you see people drop off, right? It takes a lot of energy to remain hopeful when things seem so overwhelming. So, you know, stay angry, stay full of love.
Okay. I like that. That is awesome. Okay. So, well, before we get into, no, maybe it makes more sense to do, like you brought up there, the um few ways where you can access psilocybin in Canada. And then we'll, right after that, we'll maybe touch on your advice for people who are using it for the first time. So yeah, let's start with what you found from the Government of Canada website for how we can get it.
Yeah. So the Government of Canada will cite 3 ways that you can access it legally. You can be part of a clinical trial. You can apply to Health Canada to get an exemption for, and this is all from medicinal use. I should specify medicinal therapeutic use.
Yep.
So the second way is you can apply to get an exemption, and then under the observation of like someone trained in I think it's like trained in psychedelics, you can ingest it for therapeutic reasons, which is what the like first case in Canada, that was what was going on there. He got an exemption. And then the third way is if you're someone who has been not seeing results from antidepressants or antipsychotics for an extended period of time, you can get a different kind of exemption where you can source psilocybin from other parts of the world, because there are certain countries where it's never been illegal, or it has recently been made legal, I believe. I think one of the examples I bring up in that zine is Jamaica. Psilocybin fully legal, and they even have a bit of a tourism industry built around it, so people can book retreats at some of these psilocybin centers, and the purpose of the retreat is like ingesting a certain amount of psilocybin over the period of time you're at the retreat, which, like, I don't know, it was just kind of a fun detail. I want psilocybin to be decriminalized for recreational use for not these reasons, but it is interesting to point out how there is all this like industry that can result from, you know, decriminalization, from legalization of psilocybin, that we're not even exploring because we, you know, quote unquote, don't understand the long-term effects of, you know, ingesting psilocybin. But at the same time, we do, because people have been, you know, using psilocybin since forever because it grows naturally. I think another part, and I think it's explored in the zine too. I can't remember if I included this. Pre-contact South American indigenous groups, because there are a lot of psychedelic mushrooms that grow in that part of the world. It was like just part of the society. So it's said, obviously, there aren't any written records of this period. And the information has obviously been censored by colonization, but it used to be a significant part of daily life. And then, you know, with colonization, we've sort of lost this connection to this history that we've had. And, you know, that's one example I found, but the fact that in most parts of the world there are some form of psychedelic mushrooms that grow, I think that's like something important to reflect on, because if we want to have a more, you know, respectful relationship with the planet, then obviously we're going to be sourcing our food from, you know, from what's available around us. We'd be foraging for stuff like in our immediate vicinity. So, you know, and then I guess, like, lastly, just my final point on this, like, yeah, illegal since 1974, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
that's just my lifetime, really.
yeah.
That's the year I was born. They took it
Oh,
away
well.
from that's but
Is there a connection?
yes, I came out with, oh, I gotta get rid of these mushrooms.
Look at this baby. Something about this baby.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe my parents were saw it. I don't know.
Yeah. They were like, we've got this infant now. We got to be responsible. You know what? I just don't think psilocybin should be legal anymore.
Yeah, my dad pushed that through. What a yeah, and I mean, oh, speaking of things being pushed through, have you paid attention to the court case regard? I can't remember his name right now, but the defense for the guy who ran over that the Muslim family in London. Have you paid attention to the defense?
Um, you're gonna have to remind me. I was following that like as closely as I could. Obviously, you know, with that news cycle, you would get like kind of an update every couple of months. But I know they did reach a decision.
Well,
You know,
the defense used magic mushrooms for why he did it. They said he took some like 2 days before, which I mean, I've never had the experience where you're still tripping like that 2 days later, especially with the amount. They only said like 3 grams or something. And that is usually out of your body, uh, or out of your mind at least.
it's a macro dose,
Six
right?
to yeah, 6 to 12 hours, not 48 hours later. But yeah, they defense tried to use that as the reason, which I mean, the prosecution, I do believe, proved that the science they were using was based on like opioids and how they attach to receptors and all that, and was did not apply uh to magic mushrooms. But still, those ideas get pushed into people's heads as a negative, and the people who vote conservative will use that
Yeah.
as a way to keep it from becoming legal, because those dangerous magic mushrooms are going to have us all driving all when, I mean, in that case it was proven that this guy was wanted to do that sort of thing. He was a racist, he was a xenophobe, he had all kinds of problems. And maybe he did take mushrooms like 2 days before, but I don't think those put all those thoughts into his head. And yeah.
You know, it's a it's kind of a long-standing tradition of fear-mongering. Um, I'm gonna say from like conservative groups, but certainly like, you know, liberals have their hand in that too, of citing these examples of like, I don't know, I think a really frequent story that like everyone heard was the urban legend about the person's brother who did acid one weekend and the family went away for a trip, and when they came back the brother hadn't left the spot and was just sort of, you know, sitting in his own filth because he was so impossibly high. um and I think this misinformation about drug use is just so damaging, like, obviously. And you know, and that's what it's the responsibility of a defense attorney is to orchestrate this this narrative trying to prove the innocence of their client, right? And trying to like um
Or
I think,
reasonable doubt.
yeah, I
So,
like the I think about um what a blow this was when the van attacker in Toronto, like his defense lawyer was like, well, it's because he's someone with autism spectrum disorder, right? And how a lot of ASD activists came out and they were like, no, this has nothing to do with this person like have like being autistic. This is purely someone who was full of hatred, who was, it seems very likely, radicalized by these very hateful black pilled online groups. And you, because it's easier to just point to one thing that's deeply misunderstood and be like, well, it's this reason, instead of being like getting into the complexity and the nuance of these like extremely isolating radicalizing groups. And then if you focus on like the ASD and not the intense isolation, the echo chamber effect, you know, you could even talk about how, this is getting a little off topic of
yeah.
psilocybin, but you know, when if you're someone with an ASD diagnosis and you reach the 18, there's basically no services available for you anymore, right? Um, you're kind of on your own. So, you
And
know,
on that, even before that, parents are having a hell of a time getting the services for their kids when they're young. So,
we're, yeah, just like fully like inadequate resources for people, which like, I don't know, really breaks your heart. For many years, I worked at a place that just like partnered with a someone who was an autism advocate, and as a result, like there were a number of people with ASD who worked there, and they were like, I don't know, like it was awesome, right? Um, Obviously, this is like a very anecdotal, very personal experience, but the advocate that I worked with would talk a lot about like, you know, it doesn't matter how educated I am, doesn't matter how personable I am, you know, 90% of people with autism with an undergraduate degree or some kind of like post-secondary education are unemployed because it's so difficult to enter the job market. And then, you know, like the amount of money you're allocated on ODSP is not enough to live on. It's just like very frustrating. But we're talking about magic mushrooms today, which should be decriminalized. And I think it's the tendency, um, both of this defense lawyer, but of conservatives in general, to scapegoat an issue because when there's fear, it's very easy to appeal to people's emotional reaction rather than getting into how we got to this place. Because someone doing something like objectively evil is really difficult to look in the eye. If we can just pretend this is a person who had a psychotic episode caused by drugs, I don't know, I guess that's um a comforting narrative to some, but that's not what happened.
Okay, so I believe we're at, say they're legal now, or you find a safe way to get them, and you're gonna have them recreationally. So trying magic mushrooms for the first time, you have advice in the zine. Do you want to go through some of that?
Totally. So I think it's whenever you're trying something new, um, I think it's really important to have someone you can reach out to in case things go a little sideways. So just have someone who knows what you're up to, like a trusted person who will take your call or who will respond to your texts. Even better, have someone around who, if you start feeling a little overwhelmed, um, if you start having, you know, a bad trip, can like talk you down, can reassure you, can help like take your mind off things, help center you again. Um, if you are doing so, we've, I think, thrown these terms around a little bit, but just to clarify what both of these mean. So microdosing and macrodosing. Microdosing is when you take like half a gram of mushrooms, and you're going to see some very subtle effects on your mood, but mostly it's just going to be, you know, you're maybe going to see elevations in your mood, in your ability to concentrate, less anxiety, which is so great, less depressed mood. Wonderful. A lot of people microdose before they go into work. They get a lot more satisfaction out of the workday. It's a beautiful thing. If you're gonna macrodose, which is taking a dosage to the point where you're going to see some like you're gonna hallucinate a little bit or a lot. I have heard it said, take a macrodose after you've had a meal to get the best effects. Be prepared for some like stomach discomfort. You
You
know,
can take it with ginger if you get that.
ooh,
Like,
brilliant.
yeah,
Ginger, I've also heard ingesting it as a tea can
yeah.
help mitigate some of those tummy troubles. Um, if if you're able to, it is really fun to be on mushrooms and be outside, like go for a walk. It's also really fun to be on mushrooms and watch a movie and like stay in.
Colorful
um
movies are
or
the best.
movies.
Yes.
Yeah, because Colin, just as you were saying earlier, like the effects do last for several hours, so just like keep that in mind. You're probably going to need the whole day.
Yeah.
And I guess in terms of like aftercare, like how you're feeling the next day, um I often feel like really, really good. There aren't really any like hangover effects, so to speak. um you you might feel like a little less sharp on the day after than you would normally. Sort of like if you got really, really high on, like if you smoked a bunch of weed, similar to how you feel the next day. You're fine, but you're just like, oh, I'm a little bit more dumb today. That's good. Make time to be dumb.
Okay. Make time to be dumb. I, I always do that. Writing your member of parliament, which you sum the zine up with talking about how you wrote your own member of parliament. And so you're encouraging people to write to their member of parliament. How does someone do that?
Awesome. If you go to the rcommons.ca website, you can find all the contact information for all of the MPs in Canada. So if you're if you happen to live in the same area as me, West London, our MP is Ariel Kayabaga. She's a member of the Liberal Party. I contacted her after I'd finished the zine in late September. Because I knew I was going to be chatting with you today, I actually emailed her again yesterday. So the only response I've received from her office to date basically summarizes information on the Health Canada website about magic mushrooms, which was very unhelpful. But I think once you get their contact information, I think persistence is really important. You're going to have to follow up and follow up. Just, I think the nature of being an elected official, you hear from your constituents a lot. But you know what? That's the job. So reach out, be annoying, be persistent. My MP's little slogan is like, here for you. So, like challenge accepted, Ariel. Respond to my emails, please. Another option is snail mail. So you don't have to buy a stamp if you're messaging your representative. You can just like write their address on the envelope and throw it in the mailbox, which is pretty cool, and something I also learned while researching for this zine. My most recent message with my MP's office, because I haven't received a response since early October, I CC'd the Minister of Health, just because I'm not even looking for, the Liberal Party's specific stance on this issue at this point. I'm just wondering if they're going to support a large scale study, which is constantly what they're citing, like, oh, it'll like move, like recreational use forward. We need to do this large scale study, but there's no concrete plans to perform the large scale study. And then just because like I have been treated so well, and because I've benefited so much from the magic mushroom dispensary in my neighborhood, I was also like, are people who are potentially facing charges for working in these dispensaries, are they going to get clemency when this is like inevitably legalized? Because that's just frankly the direction we're going in. It might be in a few years, it might be longer, but I'm quite confident it's going to happen. I'm seeing like a lot of the language that was used for cannabis legalization many years ago also being applied to magic mushrooms, namely like, oh, we don't understand the long-term effects, or there's a few references I've seen to people having like psychotic episodes on magic mushrooms, just like you can if you ingest cannabis and you have a history of psychosis in your family, if you're schizophrenic. So yeah, I guess like just to summarize, so artcommons.ca, you can find your MP's information. Send them a letter. You don't have to have a stamp. Send them an email. You're not going to get a response right away, but be persistent and recognize that it's the job of that person to respond to you as one of their constituents.
Is there anything else you want to tell people on most likely on the theme of magic mushrooms, but if there's something else you've got to say? I have one question, since I know you're in a band. I think is there any crossover in mall crimes with you, or is this kind of a separate life hobby? Is there any songs that you can attribute to I was on mushrooms when I wrote that, or is there
Well, you know what? I might have a few like kernels of songs that I have begun jotting down. There are several members of Mall Crimes who are very enthusiastic magic mushroom users. I don't know if we have any songs to date that are like a direct link, but stay tuned because it seems like an inevitability. I think one of the things I really try to do with this band is point out things that I think are unfair, or I just like I can't really wrap my mind around. So like why police exist, for instance, why we are allowing entire communities of people refusing access to potable water. It's another theme that's come up. And then hopefully, the criminalization of psilocybin, which is really, really fucking stupid. So because I've been talking everyone's ear off about this prior and post making this zine, because that's really helpful when you're looking into a new matter. I find it really helpful to like engage people in conversation about it. So when like coffee, which is very addictive, is legal and actually very like condoned by the current system, right? Because it makes you a more attentive, a faster worker. Magic mushrooms, on the other hand, force you to take a perspective outside of your experience, to maybe reflect on your behavior more closely, to think of larger systemic issues. Like, not to say that's a guarantee, but that's something that can happen when you ingest psilocybin. So when looking at coffee, very legal, and psilocybin, currently very illegal, what is more conducive to a capitalist system, right? The one that makes you a better worker, or the one that has the potential to radicalize you? So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. Just doing mushrooms and thinking about capitalism.
Okay, maybe that's a perfect way of signing up. Doing mushrooms and thinking about capitalism. But you're okay, so that's a positive, and then you're thinking about a negative, but the positive probably puts you in a positive space for thinking about that negative, whereas if you're just thinking about capitalism without mushrooms, life can seem pretty overwhelming and shitty.
It's a bummer, man.
Yeah.
It's a total bummer. But yeah, just to like circle back, like we were talking about, at the beginning of the interview, it's love and rage that bring us together and keeps our communities like strong, keeps us like compassionate for one another. It's not despair and cynicism. Although those
Okay.
things have their place, you know, feel your feelings fully, but you know.
All right. Well, as always, thanks for talking to me, and thanks for making the music you make. And or I don't know how MVLL CRIMES works. They make the music, you make the words, whatever. It all works really well for me. I'm glad
Thank you
you're
so
doing
much.
it. So,
I'm really glad I'm doing it. Thank you so much for letting me talk about this thing. I'm very interested and it's always such a pleasure, Colin. Wishing you the best.
all right. And same to you and all your bandmates and everyone else in London too.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. I hope you
All
have a
right.
great rest of your week. Hopefully I see
Yeah.
you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.